Hi everyone, I'm Tom. I'm actually the son of a dairy farmer, originally from Hertfordshire, and I live in Nottingham. And I was mobilised originally by Animal Rising into action. I remember seeing their first beagle rescue, which is, there was a talk just on about now. And I went to Vegan Camp Out in 2022 and heard about their plan to disrupt the dairy industry and bring to people's attention the climate and nature emergencies. And whilst doing so, holding space for farmers as a key stakeholder and part of this necessary transition. And that really inspired me to get involved. And so, yeah, I've been with Animal Rising and Vegan Support the Farmers the past 3.5 years. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you should understand why it's important to consider collaborating with unlikely allies, maybe people or organisations you've overlooked working with. And also why the issue of imports in terms of animal welfare standards is a particularly important issue to our movement. And yeah, similarly maybe to pet animals, which Elise covered in a brilliant talk, imports is a bit of a gap that we also need to close. And so for those of you who haven't heard about Vegan Support the Farmers, we started in 2023. We launched at VegFest, and we are an Animal Rising campaign. And we spent our first year, so the majority of 2024, doing a number of things. Firstly, we attended vegan events. So here's us at one of those in top left. And we were talking with people attending about the need to work with farmers, reconsider how we talk about farmers, how we relate with them, reminding people that farmers are humans just like us, which some people do sometimes forget. And yeah, we had really positive conversations, and yeah, hope sparks that thought in people's minds. We also went out into farming spaces. So here's us at a young farmers club. I remember this one. There was someone there that was she was actually vegetarian, and you know, even in these spaces, you know, diet and lifestyle changes are, you know, becoming visible, and you know, they were an accepted member of that young farmers club, which was great to see. We go to some of the big farming conferences. I remember at the NFU conference in 2025, sitting down, and one of the farmers next to us was an arable farmer. He didn't even realize that chickens only live 42 days for meat. So yeah, that was, you can't assume what farmers know, because it is a bit of a segmented industry. And also at the Oxford Farming Conference, which was a huge conference, I remember chatting with one of the previous directors. He's a beef farmer in West Midlands, but he has a vegan son. So, you know, you can't assume, make assumptions about farmers or the farming community. And so the message we were trying to spread broadly is vegans and farmers are both humans who deserve compassion and empathy, just like all the other animals we talk about at conferences like this. And we also wanted to do acts of solidarity. So at the bottom left, you can see us at the end of one of our half marathons. So we ran 4 half marathons in 2024 to fundraise for farmers' mental health. And we also went along in solidarity when the farmers were protesting. So again, another thing in common, we both love a good protest. And so here we can see us dressed up, and we had a truck driving around with all the tractors, showing that you know, we stood with them. They were calling for clearer food labelling and tackling the issue of unfair imports. And this was back in 2024, I think it was April. And so, yeah, we managed to raise £6,000 from our fundraising, and we donated that to the DPJ Foundation, a brilliant charity that's set up to support the mental health of farmers and if a farmer takes their life, then support their family too. And this actually resulted in positive press coverage, which is quite unusual for, you know, a group of vegans or animal lovers in the farming press. And so, yeah, in Farmers Weekly, we had an article spotlighting that we'd done this work and hopefully starting to plant the seed in the minds of farmers reading that okay, not all vegans are scary and terrible people. And going out and in their eyes, obviously, I don't believe that, but through these interactions and building relationships with farmers, it's not just it's seeded further things too. So this photo actually is during the dairy campaign in September 22, when Animal Rebellion at the time, now Animal Rising, were shutting down dairy distribution centres. So in the photo you can see Eve, who's going to be talking in a second about her project. Kerry, who's just did the brilliant talk on the Farm Adaptation Network and took lots of learnings from working in Animal Rebellion, Animal Rise, and Vegan Support the Farmers, and the relationships built through meeting with farmers and going to conferences into that project. And just at the back there, you might spot Alice Bruff, the amazing pig vet. And you won't see me in this photo because I was actually in police custody at the time as an action taker. And then, yeah, so I'll pass now over to Eve to talk about her project.
Hiya, I'm Eve. I'm a master's student at the University of Exeter. I'm really interested in agricultural transitions towards the plant-based food system that we know we need, but how that will affect people's livelihoods, the landscape and animal lives as well. So as part of that, and in collaboration with Vegan Support the Farmers, one of my research projects is looking at how low welfare animal product imports how that impacts British livestock farmers, and also how it's undermining decades of progress in Britain's animal welfare standards, which are seen to be world leading. But welfare is it can be a dirty word in vegan spaces, and I understand why, because I myself am an ethical vegan. But this research project and Vegan Support the Farmers more broadly, it's about finding that common ground and that shared language and the shared interests that I think we need to have a louder and a more collective voice for change for food system transformation. So yeah, as Tom said, this picture was taken in 2022 during a tour of livestock auction houses in the southwest of England. I'd never ever sat down to have a cup of tea with an animal farmer before. I don't think he'd ever sat down to have a cup of tea with a vegan. So I remember the moment really, really well. It was quite transformative for me, and I feel like I look like I'm judging the guy really hard. But I was actually quite concerned and sad, because I remember he was telling me about how much he does really deeply care about the work he does, about the land, about trying to give his animals the best life that he can, but also the changing weather, the changing subsidies, just the general systemic livelihood insecurity that many farmers face, feeling so misunderstood by the public, and the kind of pressures to intensify in the current kind of market circumstances. Another farmer I spoke to more recently as part of the imports research, interviewing farmers, was telling me, he's part of the Vegan Support the Farmers network of farmers. He told me how odd he finds his work, spending all day, every day, trying to make sure that animals are as happy and healthy as possible, and then sending them to slaughter one day, and he said he doesn't really know how to reconcile that within himself. He said he sent a few of his cows to sanctuary because he just couldn't bear to send them to slaughter, and actually one of those cows gave birth on a sanctuary. So yeah, I think the more we kind of focus on and appreciate the care that exists in people, the more that we can strengthen that and build the alliances that we need for food system transformation. Because while people eat animals, while the supermarkets promote that, while the government subsidises it, there's going to be people farming animals. So the main thing I've taken away from interviewing farmers is that they are such a wealth of knowledge on the state of the food system, and we really need to listen to each other and find that common ground, find ways of bringing them into our movement where we can. 3 key learnings from farmers about the topic of cheap imported animal products and why it's a point of alliance for vegans and farmers. So we need national regulations to make sure imports match British animal welfare standards, and we know in political movements they're more powerful when there's a diversity of voices campaigning for something. We need more local food with transparent supply chains and alternative supply chains altogether in the face of supermarkets who obscure the true cost of food and also obscure the horrific treatment of animals in industrial systems and the fate of all farmed animals generally. And then finally, we need better corporate accountability, better corporate standards for animal welfare, and redirecting subsidies to make more sustainable, more ethical food systems viable. Not only viable for farmers' livelihoods, but also affordable for consumers. I mean, we're in a cost of living crisis, so of course people are going to go to supermarkets and buy the cheaper food. And if we want a kinder, fairer, more kind of nature-friendly food system, there's huge structural barriers that are favouring intensive animal farming systems, so a collective voice for change and alliances will be necessary across communities to build the kind of economic viability and also the cultural viability that is necessary for change and alternatives. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Eve, for sharing that with us. So I'm going to go back now a bit to first principles and talk a bit about the things that have helped inspire and guide Vegan Support the Farmers and more widely the Animal Rising Network. And one of those is Kingian Nonviolence. So hands up if anyone's heard of Kingian Nonviolence here. Okay, about half, I'd say. So this is a photo of Martin Luther King Jr. He created 6 principles of nonviolence that represent active, courageous, and a loving approach to bringing about social change, focusing on defeating injustice rather than people, seeking reconciliation and creating a beloved community, winning justice through moral persuasion rather than violence. And obviously what we're trying to do is huge social change, but it needs to be done. And so I'm going to touch on a few of these principles, actually, before I go to that. So yeah, hands up if you see farmers as a part of a thriving future food system. Okay, so that's pretty much everyone here. Yeah, we can see that we don't want a future without farmers. We just want a transformation of the food system. And yeah, so the second principle from Kingian Nonviolence is the beloved community is a framework for the future, and we want to hold farmers within that future. Then the next principle, so hands up if you've ever been guilty of attacking or targeting individuals instead of the harmful systems that exist within. Yeah, I think most of us have been guilty of that. It's really hard to do in the world that we've been brought up to exist in. And yeah, principle number 3 is attacking forces of evil, not persons doing evil. So this approach helps us analyze the fundamental conditions, policies, and practices of conflicts rather than just reacting to opponents or their personalities. And then the final one, so yeah, hands up if you've ever noticed violent or hateful thoughts enter your mind. I know it's really hard to avoid, but we have to basically practice nonviolence and choose love instead of hate. And this should permeate all aspects of the campaign and of ourselves. And this only comes, again, through practice and practicing basically the opposite of what has been ingrained in us for a long time. And so through that practice and trying to change us within ourselves, that can flow out and change the world as well. And so, yeah, non-violence resists the violence of the spirit as well as the body. And so it's these 3 principles, really, I guess, that are the 3 most relevant to Vegan Support the Farmers and identifying that farmers are people that we should see as potential allies or already allies, some of them, and not as opponents to defeat or anything like that. And so with these principles, we now see that, okay, through Kingian Nonviolence, we should be working with farmers, but is that just going to slow us down? And I hope that I'm going to give you some examples now that actually it's not going to slow us down. There's a long history of radical change happening because 2 groups with seemingly opposing views work together. And so the first example I'm going to give is the top left one, which is I think this guy right here is Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago, I think it was. And he sat down there with some members of the Young Patriots organization. And Fred Hampton wanted to advance the group's goals by forming a rainbow coalition of working class people and poor people of all races. And this wasn't, immediately popular or something that was expected. Many Young Patriot organization members were racist, flaunted controversial symbols such as the Confederate flag. But like other minorities in Chicago, they experienced discrimination. In their case, it was because they were poor and from the south of the US. Over time, the Black Panthers learned to tolerate the Confederate flags and just saw them more as signs for rebellion rather than attacking them. But their only stipulation was, so they did have a red line, which is that the Young Patriots denounced racism, And eventually, the Young Patriots did reject their ideas of white supremacy and even the Confederate flag, as they realised how much they had in common with the Black Panthers and some other groups in the coalition, like the Latino Young Lords. And in the end, this coalition pooled resources, shared strategies, and provided community services and aid in Chicago and the areas around it that the government and private sectors just weren't doing. Such things like health clinics, feeding homeless people, and legal advice for those dealing with unethical landlords and police brutality. Sometimes things never change. And then the other group, the one that sort of helped inspire Vegans Support the Farmers, certainly our name, is Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. This is summarised in the film Pride, which I recommend watching if you haven't already. And this was when groups of lesbians and gays from London and other sort of more wealthy parts of the country showed relentless compassion and solidarity with striking miners in Wales in 1984. And initially, this was sort of rejected and there was homophobia, but through persistence, this was eventually accepted, and a really strong bond and relationship formed there. And unfortunately, the strike ended unsuccessfully, but they still returned this compassion when the National Union of Mine Workers tabled and voted for a motion at the Labour Party conference to enshrine the rights of gay and lesbian marriage, and then which helped pave the route for that to be legalised, and also joined Lesbian and Gays Support the Miners in leading the 1985 Gay Pride March. And so the much more recent example is in Denmark. They're the first European country to publish a plant-based action plan, and that was through the hard work of Rune Christopher and others from the Vegetarian Society, working with organic farming organisations to work together and lobby the government to support and increase plant-based production. And so hopefully now you're somewhat convinced that this is a good idea. And so this is where imports comes in. So if we look at the top priorities, this is just my opinion, it's not accurate like research or anything. But yeah, when you think of a handful of what might be the top priorities of farmers and animal advocates, although we might disagree on the detailed definition of things like welfare and other areas, one thing with a lot of overlap is imports. And so, yeah, raise your hand if you think that imports meet the standards that our farmers have to meet. Okay, I think Eve hopefully helped you with that one. And the reality is that, 95% of our imports have lower standards than here. And obviously, while we're trying to raise the standards here, that's really low abroad. But the good news is 84% of the UK population, when surveyed, support the banning or restriction of those imports that don't meet our standards. So what can we do about it? Well, firstly, what are some of these examples? Because not everyone knows about them. So the first image represents battery cages. So these were banned here in 2012, but it's still perfectly legal to import battery eggs, and they're often used as ingredients in processed foods. So the public buying them has no idea, what kind of eggs are being used. And trade deals with India and Mexico are increasing the amount of imports of these products. The middle symbol is representing a sow stall. So there's brilliant work going on at the moment trying to ban farrowing crates in the UK, which confine mother pigs for 3 months of every pregnancy of every year, and they can barely move and turn around or anything like that. So extremely low welfare system. Sow stalls, however, confine the pigs for 9 months of every year, so they're literally 3 times as bad. And these are still legal abroad. They were banned here in the UK, and we still import over 50% of our pig meat from countries that allow this system. And the final one is foie gras, which is the production of, basically involves force feeding ducks and geese, and it's banned in the UK. And we still, import and sell foie gras. And so, as I said, the difference, with the exception of foie gras, a lot of these other products, it's impossible to know how when some of the public are buying these products, how how the animals have lived in these systems. And then in terms of what we can do about this, we have existing legislation that mandates imports of meat must meet UK slaughter laws, and all we need to ask for basically is extending this to include production methods, and then there's no ambiguity, and any wins we have here for animal welfare can automatically apply to imports too. And if, for whatever reason, that proves too difficult, we can take things individually. So, for example, in June 2023, the Shark Fins Act was passed into law. This bans the import and export of detached shark fins and products containing them. So it'd be a much longer process, but we could take things one by one if needed and make sure and ban the imports of them. So what we're asking for is not impossible, and like I showed, it has huge support from the public. And as a movement, why do we need to worry about this? Well, while we import lower welfare products, we're creating a race to the bottom. Without closing this loophole, we're effectively we're going to see this strong opposition to the UK improving our welfare standards. And because these imports are produced to low welfare standards, it often involves cutting corners and lowers the cost of production. And so it's an incentive for the retailers that are just trying to make a profit to stock and sell these items because they can get a higher markup. And then, so therefore it promotes these in the eyes of the retailer. And often, even despite the markup from the retailer, they are still cheaper at the end point when they're purchased by the public, and therefore the amount of animal products that the public can afford to buy with their set amount of money is higher too. So it sort of inflates consumption as well. And so we need to work with a broad range of organisations to improve the chance of success. And doing so, for example, working with farmers on this, on imports, can also help build relationships to work on other issues that we align on further down the line. And so I have an example of what this can look like for imports, because the brilliant Animal Policy International hosted an event last year at the Houses of Parliament called Stop Cruel Imports, and it really showed that this is an issue that has strong support across the board. So they hosted this alongside with Compassion in World Farming and the RSPCA, and not only did you have these animal organisations here, but you had farming industry bodies too. So the British Egg Council, there's guys here from that, and the National Sheep Association were both there and both supportive of this event, which is pretty much unheard of in our movement. And not only that, but it had cross-party support. So we have a Labour, Lib Dem, and Conservative MPs all talking in favour of closing this imports loophole. So yeah, I think that's thank you very much for listening. My suggestion was that if after watching this you are convinced that we need to maybe have a rethink about if there's other people we can work with that we might have ruled out, just maybe take a bit of time on your way home or when you can get a chance to think about potential allies you might have overlooked. And if there's any of the campaigns you're working on, could add the issue of imports to what you're campaigning for. Thanks everyone.